All right, in these videos, we've been talking process. So we've been talking through the research process, and disregard the word marketing because it's any research process, but I designed these slides for a marketing course. We start by recognizing the problem, getting to the heart of the issue that the organization needs data to help make a decision. So we turn that into a research problem. We then either go external and hire others to do the research by creating an RFP, a request for proposal, or we do it in-house by creating a research request to get our bosses to approve the research and the time and the money that it will cost. In either regard, there is a research proposal created, either by the companies that want to do research for you in response to your RFP, or you are doing it as the detailed information that follows up the research request. So before you put all this time and effort into fleshing out how you're going to design the research project, how you're going to get your sample, your participants, how you're going to do your analysis, before you put all those details, you first want preliminary approval. That's the research request. And then you give the details in the proposal. So the research proposal includes the research design, the methods, the sampling procedure, the type of analysis, and the cost of doing it. Once that research is signed off, so parties involved have signed that research proposal, you would then collect the data, analyze the data, make recommendations. And all the videos after this are going to be the collecting, the analyzing, the making recommendations. But to wrap up the process that we're discussing here, let's look at this very last step, which is writing that research report. What goes into a research report once you finish this process? Whether it's doing it for marketing to look at customers or products, or whether it's about the operations and processes for the organization, how do we improve quality? What can we do better to be more efficient and effective in our organization? How do we make our clients happy, our suppliers happy? Whether you're doing that type of analysis or whether you are doing experimentation to determine whether a drug is going to be effective, or whether a treatment's effective, or whether certain methods have an impact on the environment. All of that follows the same process. And so let's finish it off by looking at how to write that final report. So I'm just going to very quickly go to the very bottom of these slides. And let's talk about the research report. Communication in your research report is very important. We need it to be complete. It needs to be clear. It needs to be concise, and it needs to be accurate. Okay, so when we talk about clarity, we are talking about short paragraphs, short sentences, precise words. Okay, so that conciseness, that clarity goes together. So very short, very common language, right? You are the expert, or after you've watched all these videos, you'll know a lot of stats and research techniques and all that terminology, right? But your client or your bosses may not. So you are translating it into words that allow for decisions and actions. So short paragraphs, short sentences, precise words. Okay? We want it to be concise. Don't try to impress by telling everything you found. Stick to the most important pieces. You can have an appendix where you have a lot more detail if they want to dig through the weeds, but your report is going to hit those highlights. All right, we need it to be accurate. So we need to look at what we mean by accuracy. And I'll come back to this slide, but let's just look at some errors. So, for example, this statement here, in the United States, 14% of the population has an elementary school education or less, 51% has attended or graduated from high school, 16% has attended college. The challenge with that wording is that if we add those up, they don't equal 100%. So it's not entirely clear to the reader what we're talking about here. Now, we could have a pie chart that shows the breakdown of the population by their final education. And so it's 100% of the whole, the pie is whole, and then you have the slices of the pie that show it. So make sure you are clear and that there are not questions that come out of your wording to say, well, who's the other? Who's the rest of it? So make sure that if you can have someone read through your final report to help and say, okay, well, here's the questions it creates, the unanswered information, the things that are unanswered based on what you have there, so that you can be more accurate in your wording and clearer. There might be confusion between percentages and percentage points. The company's profits as a percentage of sales were 6% and 8% in 5 years later. Therefore, they increased only 2% in 5 years. So this increase in 2 percentage points is really a 33% increase, right? So the difference between 6 and 8 is 2, but the actual percentage change is 33. So using more concise language, being clearer, putting it into layman's terms. Inaccuracy can be caused by grammatical errors. So reduction in the government's prices supports for dairy has reduced farm income 600 million to 800 million per year. Well, 600 million to 800 million, it doesn't seem like reduction, right? That went up $200 million. But it's the reduction that got bigger, right? They went from reducing it by 600 to reducing it by 800. But notice that it's really not clear what's being meant here. So we want to put it in the phrasing that people are most likely to be looking for, right? Which is the funding, the price supports went from 2 million to 1 million. We can do the quick math in our head and see that's a reduction of 1 million. So putting it in the language that people are expecting to read it. So you have to know your audience, who is going to be reviewing this report. And we got to make sure that we haven't confused any terminology that's going to lead to faulty conclusions. The Jones household annual income increased from $15,000 in 1979 to $45,000 in 2009, tripling the family's purchasing power. So we want to make sure that that is clear what is actually happening here, right? So the challenge with this statement is that that's a 30-year span, and yes, their income is 3 times what it was 30 years ago, but what was inflation during that time? So how much did the cost of living increase? Because are they really actually able to buy more than they were 30 years prior? Or are you worse off if inflation has been more than that? So we want to be very clear and concise in the way that things are framed. So as you're writing up your report, think about completeness. Did you meet all the objectives? Did you answer all the research problems? Are you explaining it in concise and clear terms so that the interpretation is accurate? Okay. When it comes to your report, you are going to have a title page. This title page should match the RFP if there is one. Include the name of the preparers, who the report is prepared for, and the date. Your table of contents should not exceed 1 page. Okay, so we're going to be short, concise, and clear. So this is not a humongous document, which means the table of contents should not be more than 1 page. Major sections and page numbers where information starts need to be included. There should be a list of figures and tables that have corresponding page numbers. Okay. You're going to include an executive summary. So this is that at a quick glance, we can see, what did you learn in this research project? How are we helping to solve the organization's problems or take advantage of opportunities? So no more than 1 page, key findings tie back to that research problem and the management decision problem, and tying it back to decisions and actions that can be taken. So what did you learn? What can we do with this information? So if you only had 60 seconds to tell somebody about your research, that's this executive summary. We did XYZ very quickly. We found ABC, which then helps the organization in its decision regarding whatever. So after your executive summary, if that's the only thing anyone ever reads, it should tell them basically what you did at a very high, broad level and then what you found and how this adds value to the organization. Then we can dig into a bit more details. We can have our background, so we can pull this from the proposal. What is the management decision problem? What circumstances led to this? What are those symptoms? The context that led to this. That's your background. It's probably very similar to what's in your proposal. You can also include in this background similar studies and some of the kind of literature review that you found in terms of comparables that others have done. Your background should be 1 to 2 pages in length. Then you're going to have a section on your methods. Again, this is going to be similar to your proposal. You make sure you avoid that technical jargon, right? You're explaining this to people who are not your level of expertise in stats and research. So plain language, research design, research methods, sampling method, matching the proposal likely. You may have some additional notation here in terms of some limitations in the sampling or analysis and how they were overcome. So if there was non-response, we sent out the survey to 100 people, but only 20 people responded. So extra steps were needed and we did whatever. Note potential error to reduce that liability. So if it is not a representative sample, it's a, then we need to note that, right? Or any challenges that might limit the interpretation, application, or accuracy should be included in this methodology piece here. What was your data analysis methods? What did you do to analyze the data? Okay. And to what population will your findings apply? So who is this group that your sample came from, and how, and will you be able to extrapolate to that greater group? So what was done? How was it done? Why was it done this way? So approximately 2 pages on your methods. A number of this comes from the research proposal you had previously. Then comes your findings, the longest section of the report. This is where you're going to have your charts and graphs, your tables, bar graphs, pie charts. In later videos, we will look at lots of different type of data visualizations you can use. There are different ones that are appropriate depending on the data that you have. So you want to include those tables and figures in this report. Make sure if it is included, a data visualization tool is used in this report that is mentioned somewhere in the text. So you have a sentence explanation that goes with your pie chart or your table. You're probably going to organize it by issue. So that might be that you have different objectives that were part of this project or different aspects that were being looked at in this research. So you would then organize it by those. So what are the central issues relevant to your management decision problem? Okay. And then you're going to have your conclusions and your recommendations. So how do we get from the data and the findings, that descriptive information, to recommendations? So what are the steps that led to the conclusion? Make sure it links back to that original research problem. Make sure that it is information that can help inform a decision by the organization. So what do the results mean to the business? Is there enough evidence to draw a conclusion? So as we get into the statistics, we'll look at the fact that it may be that your sample size was not big enough to detect a difference. And so in that case, we cannot draw the conclusion that there is a difference. And so then the recommendation is an increased sample size, further exploration. So you may not be able to draw a conclusion based on your analysis, and you need to explain why. What did we learn? What did we not learn? And why weren't we able to learn those things that we didn't learn? Okay. So ultimately, your recommendations onto what actions should be taken in response to this information. Going back to that discovery-oriented and strategy-oriented research methods we had talked about previously, what is it we can actually take away from this? Are we changing strategy and processes? Have we learned new information? What do we do with this information we have collected? And that brings us to conclusions and recommendations. We'll just define them here. So our conclusions here are going to be generalizations that answer questions. Generalizations that answer questions raised by research objectives. I'm writing on a vertical screen, which is why the handwriting is so terrible. Research objectives, okay, raised by, yeah. All right, so our conclusions need to tie back to that research objective. How will we know if this research is successful? What were those components? And so what we're generalizing here in our conclusion should tie back to that. And then our recommendations are going to take those conclusions and apply to the strategy or tactics. So we're going to take those conclusions and we're going to apply them to the strategy or tactics of our organization that are going to focus on our client, if it's external here, or the company itself. So we're going to focus on the organization's achievements. What are they doing well, and how is that backed up by our conclusions? Or we have or recommending some different strategies that will make them different, or differentiated advantages. Some of these definitions. So in other words, what can be done with the info? What action should be taken? Conclusions. I don't even know what I have here. Conclusions. Try this again. Conclusions applied. Applied to strategy or tactics that focus on their achievements or differentiated advantages. In other words, we take what we learned and we say, okay, how does this celebrate what the great things the organization are doing, their achievements, what makes them different, and then what's the plan going forward to further take advantage of what makes them great? So moving in that direction and developing future strategies and tactics from that. So reducing the negative, accentuating the positive, turning it into action, and moving forward. Some of these definitions from different sources and stuff suck. Turn it into layman's terms, make it simple. Just like with your report, where you're going to turn it into what does it really mean. Your report will have an appendix. The appendix is going to be all that extra detail that's too complex for the rest of the document. This will include a copy of your survey or your discussion guide from your focus group or your observation checklist, whatever tool you were using to collect information. It will contain detailed calculations for sample sizes. It'll include more information about your analysis process. It might include more descriptive statistics to help summarize the data itself. It may include copies of raw data depending on the information, how it was collected, and what your agreement is with whomever contracted you to do this project. So when it's all said and done, the only document that really remains long after your research project ends is the report, which means inside this report needs to be any of the details or information for the legacy of this project. So if we want to go back later and say, what happened? What did we learn? It should be in the report. How did we collect this information? It should be in the report. So it is the archive of this project. It is the only thing that really truly is kept. All of the initial, for example, if the surveys were filled out by hand, those individual surveys that people filled out, we don't retain those long term, right? So that tends to all disappear, and only the report, the summary, and any of the details that might be needed as we reflect back on it, that's what gets kept here in that final report. You might have an oral report, a presentation that goes with that final report. So maybe your data visualization, your pie charts, your bar graphs, your tables get put into PowerPoint or Prezi. And you might hand out hard copies of those visuals themselves or of the final report. If you're doing a presentation of your findings, you will focus on the conclusions, recommendations, that section of the report. And really your presentation should answer the following. What does the data really mean? What impact does it have? What have we learned from the data? What do we need to do with this, given the information we now have? What are the actions and decisions we can now make? You also might comment on future studies that can be done from this, so it led to other questions. So what are the areas for future exploration? And what could make the information that we have gathered more useful? So where can we go next in terms of future exploration, other research projects, as well as what can be done for the organization for them to create change, create decisions from this. In some later videos, we'll talk about storytelling with data. So once we've spent a bit of time analyzing data, creating visuals, then we'll look at telling a story. And so your oral report should convey that story from your data as well.